Part 6. But it is now 3 years since I had arrived at the end of the treatise that contains all these things and began to review it in order to put it into the hands of a printer, when I learned that some people to whom I defer and whose authority over my actions can hardly be less than that of my reason over my thoughts, had disapproved of an opinion in physics published a short time earlier by someone else, concerning which I do not want to say that I was in agreement, but rather that I had not noticed anything in it before their censuring of it that I could imagine to be prejudicial either to religion or to the state, nor, as a consequence, had I found anything that would have prevented me from writing it. Had reason persuaded me of it, and this made me fear that there might likewise be found among my opinions one in which I had been mistaken, notwithstanding the great care that I have always taken never to accept into my beliefs any new opinions for which I did not have very certain demonstrations, and never to write anything that could turn to anyone's disadvantage. This was sufficient to make me change the resolution I had to publish my opinions. For although the reasons for which I had earlier made the resolution were very strong, my inclination, which has always made me hate the business of writing books, immediately made me find enough other reasons to excuse me from it. And these reasons, both for and against, are such that not only do I have some interest in stating them here, but perhaps also the public has some interest in knowing them. I had never made much of the things that came from my mind, and so as long as I had reaped no other fruits from the method I am using except my own satisfaction regarding certain problems that pertain to the speculative sciences, or else my attempt at governing my moral conduct by means of the reasons which the method taught me, I believed I was under no obligation whatever to write anything about it. For as to moral conduct, everyone is so very full of his own viewpoint that it would be possible to find as many reformers as heads, if any one other than those God has established as rulers over his peoples, or even those to whom he has given sufficient grace and zeal to be prophets, were permitted to try to change anything here. And although my speculations pleased me very much, I believe that others also had their own, which perhaps pleased them more. But as soon as I had acquired some general notions regarding physics, and beginning to test them in various particular difficulties, I had noticed where they could lead and how much they differ from the principles that have been in use up to the present. I believed I could not keep them hidden away without sinning grievously against the law that obliges us to procure, as much as in our power, the common good of all men. For these notions made me see that it is possible to arrive at knowledge that would be very useful in life, and that, in place of that speculative philosophy taught in the schools, it is possible to find a practical philosophy by means of which, knowing the force and the actions of fire, water, air, the stars, the heavens, and all the other bodies that surround us, just as distinctly as we know the various skills of our craftsmen, we might be able in the same way to use them for all the purposes for which they are appropriate, and thus render ourselves as it were masters and possessors of nature. This is desirable not only for the invention of an infinity of devices that would enable one to enjoy trouble-free the fruits of the earth and all the goods found there, but also principally for the maintenance of health, which unquestionably is the first good and the foundation of all the other goods of this life. For even the mind depends so greatly on the temperament, and so on the disposition of the organs of the body, that if it is possible to find some means to render men generally more wise and more adroit than they have been up till now, until now, I believe that one should look for it in medicine. It is true that the medicine currently practiced contains few things whose usefulness is so noteworthy, but without intending to ridicule it, I am sure there is no one, not even among who among those who make a profession of it, who would not admit that everything known in medicine is practically nothing in comparison with what remains to be known, and that one could rid oneself of an infinity of maladies, as much of the body as of the mind, and even perhaps also and of all the remedies that nature has provided us, for having the intention of spending my entire life in the search for so indispensable a science, and having found a path that seems to me such that by following it one ought infallibly to find the science, unless one is prevented from doing so either by the brevity of life or by a lack of experiments. I judged there to be no better remedy against these two obstacles than to communicate faithfully to the public the entirety of what little I had found, and to urge good minds to try to advance beyond this by contributing, each according to his inclination and ability, to the experiments that must be performed, and also by communicating to the public everything they might learn, in order that, while subsequent inquirers, beginning where their predecessors had left off, and thus joining together the lives, and next page, labors of many, we might all advance together much further than a single individual who could do on his own. Moreover, I noticed in regard to experiments that they are more necessary as one is more advanced in knowledge. For in the beginning it is better to make use only of those observations which present themselves of their own accord to our senses, and which we cannot ignore, provided we reflect, however, so little on them, rather than to search for unusual and contrived experiments. The reason for this is that these more unusual experiments often deceive one when one does not yet know the causes of the more common ones, and that the circumstances on which the unusual ones depend are almost always so special, and so minute that it is very difficult to notice them. But the order I have held to has been the following. First, I have tried to find in general the principles or first causes of all that is or can be in the world, without considering anything but God alone, who created the world, and without deriving these principles from any other source, but from certain seeds of truth that are naturally in our souls. After that I examined what were the first and most ordinary effects that could be deduced from the causes, and it seems to me by this means I had found heaven, earth, stars, and earth, and even on the earth water, air, fire, minerals, and other such things that are the most common of all, and the simplest, and as a consequence the easiest to know. Then, when I wanted to descend to those things which were more particular, so many different ones were presented to me that I did not believe it possible for the human mind to distinguish the forms or species of bodies that are on the earth from an infinity of others that could have been there, had it been the will of God to have put them there, nor, as a consequence, to make them serviceable to us, unless we advance to the causes through the effects, and make use of many particular observations. After this, passing my mind again over all the objects that have ever presented themselves to my senses, I dare say I did not notice anything in them that I could not explain easily by means of the principles I had found. But I must also admit that the power of nature is so ample and so vast, and these principles are so simple and so general that I notice hardly any particular effect without at once knowing that it can be deduced in many different ways from them, and that ordinarily my greatest difficulty is to find in which of these ways it depends on them. For to this end I know of no other expedient at all except to search once more for some experiments which are such that their outcomes are not the same. If it is in one of these ways rather than in another that one ought to explain the outcome as to the rest, I am now at the point where it seems to me I see quite well what approach one must take in order to make most of the experiments that can serve this purpose. But I also see that they are of such a kind and of so great a number that neither my adroitness nor my financial resources, even if I had 1,000 times more than I have, would suffice for all of them. so that, according as I henceforth have the opportunity to perform more or fewer experiments, I shall also advance more or less in the knowledge of nature. That is what I meant to make known through the treatise that I had written, and to show there so clearly the utility that the public could gain from such knowledge, that I would oblige all those who desire the general well-being of men. That is to say, all those who really are virtuous, not just appearing to be so through false pretenses or merely by reputation, both to communicate those experiments they have already performed, and to assist me in the search for those that remain to be performed. But since then, other reasons have made me change my mind, and to think that I really ought to continue to write about all the things I judged to be of some importance, to the extent that I discovered the truth with respect to them, and to make them the same care in regard to them as I would take if I wanted to have them published. I did this as much to have all the more of an occasion to examine them well, since without doubt one always looks more carefully at what one believes must be seen by many than at what one does only for oneself, and often the things that have seemed to me to be true when I began to conceive them have appeared false to me when I wanted to put them on paper. As in order not to lose any occasion to benefit the public, if I am able, and in order that, if my writings are worth anything, those who will have them after my death can thus use them as will be most fitting. But I must not in any way consent to their being published during my lifetime, so that neither the hostilities and the controversies to which they might be subject, nor even such reputation as they could gain for me, would give me any occasion for losing the time I have intended to use in instructing myself. For though it may be true that each man is obliged to secure as best he can the good of others, and that to be useful to no one is, strictly speaking, to be worthless, still it is also true that our concerns ought to extend further than to the present time, and that it is well to omit things that perhaps would yield some profit to those who are alive, when it is with the intention of doing other than they of doing other things that would yield even more profit to our posterity. In any event, I very much want people to understand that what little I have learned up until now is almost nothing in comparison to what I do not know and to what I do not despair of being able to learn. For it is almost the same with those who little by little discover the truth in the sciences as it is with those who, upon beginning to acquire wealth, have less trouble making large acquisitions than they had before when they were poor in making very small ones. Or indeed, one can compare them to army commanders whose forces typically grow in proportion to their victories, and who need more skill to maintain themselves after losing a battle than they do to take cities or provinces when they have won one. For it is truly to engage in battle when one tries to overcome all the difficulties and errors that prevent us from arriving at the knowledge of the truth, and it is truly to lose a battle when one accepts a false opinion touching on a matter that is at all general and important, and afterward it requires much more skill to recover one's former position than to make great progress when one already has principles that are assured. For myself, if I have already found some truths in the sciences, and I hope the things contained in this volume will make people judge that I have found some of them, I can say that these things are only things that result from and depend on 5 or 6 principal difficulties that I have surmounted, and that I count as so many battles in which I I have had fortune on my side. I would not even fear to say that I think I need to win only 2 or 3 more battles like them in order to succeed entirely in my plans, and that my age is not at all so advanced that in the ordinary course of nature I might I might not still have enough time to bring this about, but I believe I am all the more obliged to manage well the time remaining to me, the more hope I have of being able to use it well, and doubtless I would have many opportunities to lose time had I published the foundations of my physics, for although they are nearly also are for they are nearly all so evident that it is necessary only to understand them in order to believe them. And although there has not been a single one for which I did not believe I could give demonstrations, nevertheless, because it is impossible for them to be in agreement with all the diverse opinions of other men, I foresee that I would often be distracted by the disputes they would engender. One could say that these disputes might be useful as much in order that I be made aware of my faults, as in order that, if I had anything worthwhile to say, others would by this means have greater understanding of it, and that, since many can see more than one man alone, these others, by beginning right now to use it, might also help me with their discoveries. But although I recognize that I am extremely prone to error, and that I almost never rely on the first thoughts that come to me, still the experience I have of the objections that can be made against me prevents me from expecting any profit from them, for I have already often put to the test the judgments of those I look to be my friends, as well as some of others whom I took to be indifferent, and even of those whose maliciousness and envy I knew would try hard enough to discover what affection would hide from my friends. But it has rarely happened that an objection has been raised against me that I had not at all foreseen, unless it was very far removed from my subject. Thus, I have almost never found any critic of my opinions who did not seem to me to be either less rigorous or less unbiased myself. Nor have I ever observed that through the method of disputations practiced in the schools, any truth has been discovered that had into then been unknown. For so long as each person in the dispute aims at winning, he is more concerned with making much out of probability than with weighing the arguments on each side. And those who have long been good advocates are not, on that account, afterward better judges as to the utility that others might gain from the communication of my thoughts. It cannot be so very great, given that I have not yet at all taken them so far that there is no need to add many things to them before applying them to actual practice. And to think I can say without vanity that if there is anyone who is capable of doing this, it must be myself rather than someone else. Not that there would not be in the world many minds incomparably greater than mine, but because one cannot conceive a thing so well and make it one's own when one learns it from someone else as one can when one discovers it for oneself. This is so true in this matter that although I have often explained some of my opinions to people with good minds, who, while I spoke to them, seemed to understand them quite distinctly, nevertheless, when they repeated them, I noticed that they had almost always changed them in such a way that I could no longer acknowledge them as mine. In this connection, I am very happy here to ask our descendants never to believe the things people tell them um, came from me, unless I myself have divulged them. And I am in no way surprised by the extravagances attributed to all those ancient philosophers, whose writings we do not have, nor do I judge for that reason that their thoughts have been so very unreasonable, given that they were the greatest minds of their time, but only that their thoughts have been poorly reported to us. For one also sees that it has almost never happened that any of their followers had ever surpassed them. And I'm sure that the most impassioned of those who now follow Aristotle would believe themselves fortunate if they had as much knowledge of nature as he had, even if it were on the condition that they would never have any more. They are like ivy, which never stretches any higher than the trees supporting it, and which often even descends again after it has reached their tops. For it seems to me that they too are redescending. That is, they are making themselves somehow less knowledgeable than if they abstained from the studying. Not content with knowing all that is intelligibly explained in their author, They want, in addition, to find the solutions there to many difficulties about which he says nothing and about which he has perhaps never thought. Still, their manner of philosophizing is very convenient for those who have only very mediocre minds, for the obscurity of the distinctions and the principles they make use of is the reason why they can speak about all things as boldly as if they knew them, and why they can uphold everything they say against the most subtle and the most adroit without anyone's having the means of convincing them that they are mistaken. In this, they seem to me like a blind man who, in order to fight without a disadvantage against someone who is sighted, had made his opponent go into the depths of some very dark cellar. And I may say that these people have an interest. Oh wait, where is it? Oh, sorry. And I may say that these people have an interest in my refraining from publishing the principles of the philosophy I use. For my principles, being as very simple and very evident as they are, I would, by publishing them, be doing almost the same as if I were to open some windows and make some daylight enter that cellar they had gone into in order to fight. But even the best minds have no reason for wanting to know these principles, for if they want to know how to speak about all things and to acquire the reputation for being learned, they will achieve their objective morality. They will achieve their objective more easily, not morality, my fault on that, by contenting themselves with probability, which can be found without great difficulty in all sorts of matters, than by seeking the truth, which can only be discovered little by little in some in which, when it is a question of speaking about other matters, obliges one to confess frankly that one is ignorant of them. But if they prefer the knowledge of some few truths to the vanity of appearing to be ignorant of knowing nothing, as no doubt it is really preferable to do, and if they want to follow a plan similar to mine, they do not, on that score, need me to say anything more except what I have already said in this discourse. For if they are capable of advancing further than I have, than a fortiori or fortiori, they are also capable of finding for themselves all that I think I have found. Inasmuch as I have never examined anything except in an orderly manner, it is certain that what still remains for me to discover is of itself more difficult and more hidden than what I have heretofore been able to discover, and they would take much less pleasure in learning it from me than from themselves. Moreover, the habit will acquire of seeking first the easy things, and then of passing little by little, by degrees, to other more difficult ones, will serve them better than all my instructions could do. As for myself, I am convinced that if I had been taught from my youth all the truths for which I have since then sought demonstrations, and if I had not had any difficulty in learning them, I might perhaps have never known any other truths, and at least I would never have acquired the habit and facility I think I have for always finding new truths, to the extent that I apply myself in searching for them. And in a world, if there is any task in the world that could not be accomplished so well by anyone else but the same person who began it, it is the one on which I am working. It is true that, with respect to experiments that can help here, one man alone cannot suffice to perform them all, but neither can he usefully employ hands other than his own, except those of craftsmen, or such people as he could pay, and whom the hope of gain, which is a very effective means, would cause to do precisely what he ordered them to do. For as to volunteers who, out of curiosity or a desire to learn, might offer themselves in order perhaps to help him, aside from the fact that they usually make more promises than they produce achievements and merely make fine proposals, none of which will come to anything, they would inevitably want to be paid by the explanation of various difficulties, or at least by compliments and useless conversations, which could not cost him so little time that he would not lose by it. And as to the experiments that others have already performed, even if these people did want to communicate them to him, something those who call them secrets would never do. They are for the most part composed of many details and superfluous ingredients that it would be very hard for him to discern the truth in them. Besides, he would find almost all of them to be so badly explained, or even so false, because those who have done them strove to make them appear to be in conformity with their principles. That if there were among them some experiments that might serve him, they could not be worth the time he would need to spend in selecting them. In this way, if there were someone in the world whom one assuredly knows to be capable of finding the greatest things and the things as beneficial to the public as possible, and whom, for this cause, other men were to exert themselves to help in every way to succeed in his plans, I do not see that they could do a thing for him except to make a donation toward the expenses of the experiments he would need, and, for the rest, to prevent his leisure from being wasted by the importunity of anyone. But although I do not presume so much of myself as to want to promise anything out of the ordinary, or feast on such vain thoughts as to imagine that the public ought to be especially interested in my plans, I do not have so base a soul that I would not want to accept from anyone any favor that one might believe that I had not deserved. All these considerations taken together were the reasons why, 3 years ago, I did not at all want to divulge the treatise I had on hand, and why I had even made a resolution not to make public during my lifetime, and my other treatise, which was so general, or on the basis of which one could understand the foundation of my physics. But since then there have been yet again two other reasons that have obliged me to place here certain particular essays, and to render to the public some account of my actions and my plans. The first is that if I failed to do so, many who knew of the intention I once had to have certain writings published could imagine that the reasons for which I am abstaining from doing so were more to my disadvantage than they are. For although I do not love glory excessively, indeed, if I dare say so, I hate it, inasmuch as I judge it to be contrary to the tranquillity I esteem above all things. Still, I have also never tried to hide my actions as if they were crimes, nor have I taken many precautions so as not to be known. This is the case as much because I would have believed I would be doing myself an injustice, as because it would have given me a certain kind of disquet disquet, sorry, which or disquiet, sorry, which again would have been contrary to the perfect peace of mind I am seeking. And because, having always been thus indifferent about the concern over being known or not known, I could not prevent my acquiring some type of reputation. I thought I ought to do my best at least to spare myself from having a bad one. The other reason that has obliged me to write this is as follows. I saw more and more every day the delay that the plan I have of self-instruction is suffering because of an infinity of experiments of which I have need, and which it is impossible for me to perform without the help of others. And although I do not flatter myself so much as to hope that the public will become greatly taken with my interests, still, I also do not want to fail myself so much as to give those who will survive me cause to reproach me one day on the grounds that I could have left them many far better things than I had done, if I had not so badly neglected making them understand how they could contribute to my plans. And I thought that it was easy to choose certain matters that, without being subjected to much controversy or obliging me to declare more of my principles than I desire, would nevertheless allow me to show quite clearly what I can or cannot do in the sciences. I cannot say whether I have been successful in this, and I do not at all want to prejudice the judgments of anyone in speaking for myself about my writings, but I shall be very happy if they are examined. And in order to have more of an opportunity to do this, I am imploring all who have any objections to make against them to take the trouble to send them to my publisher, and, on being advised about them by him, I shall try at the same time to append my reply to the objections, and by this means seeing both of them together. Readers will judge the truth all the more easily, for I promise never to make long replies to them, but only to admit my errors very candidly. If I recognize them, or even if I cannot perceive any, to say simply what I believe to be required for the defense of what I have written, without adding to it an explanation of any new material, in order not to become endlessly involved in one issue after another. And if any of those things about which I have spoken at the beginning of the dioptrics and the meteors are shocking at first glance because I call them suppositions, and seem to lack the inclination to prove them, I entreat the reader to have the patience to read the whole thing with attention, and I hope he will find himself dissatisfied with it. For it seems to me that the reasonings follow each other there in such a way just that as the last are demonstrated by means of the first, which are their causes, so these first are reciprocally demonstrated by means of the last, which are their effects. And one must not imagine that I am here committing the fallacy that logicians call a circle. For experience rendering the majority of these effects very certain, the causes from which I deduce the effects serve not so much as to prove them as to explain them. On the contrary, it is rather the case that the causes are are what are proved by the effects, and I have called them suppositions only to make it understood that I think I can deduce them from these first truths that I have explained above. But I wanted expressly not to do so in order to prevent certain minds, who imagine that they know in one day all that someone else has thought about for 20 years as soon as he has said but 2 or 3 words to them about it, and who are more subject to error and sorry, excuse me, and the less capable of truth, the more penetrating and lively they are. From being able to take this occasion to build some extravagant philosophy on what they believe are my principles, and in order to prevent me from being blamed for it. For as to the opinions that are entirely mine, I do not apologize for their being new, since, if one considers well the arguments for them, I am sure that one will find them so simple, and so in conformity with common sense, that they will seem less extraordinary and less strange than my other ones could have on the same subjects. Nor do I pride myself at all on being the first discoverer of any of them. Rather, I pride myself on never having accepted them because they have or have not been said by others, but only because reason has persuaded me of them. If craftsmen cannot immediately carry out the invention explained in the dioptrics, I do not believe one could say, on that account, it is bad. For inasmuch as skill and practice are needed to make and adjust the machines I have described, without any detail being overlooked there, I would be no less astonished if they were to succeed on the first try than if someone were able to learn in one day to play the flute with the distinction simply because he had been given a good score. And if I write in French, the language of my country, rather than in Latin, the language of my teachers, it is because I am hoping that those who use only their natural reason in all its purity would judge my opinions better than those who believe only in old books. And as to those who combine good sense with study, whom alone I wish to have as my judges, they will not at all, I am sure, be so partial to Latin that they refuse to listen to my reasons because I explain them in the vernacular. As to the rest, I do not at all want to speak here in detail about the future progress I hope to make in the sciences, or to involve myself, vigivis, I don't even know how to pronounce it, that's a French word, the public in any promise that I am not assured of keeping. Rather, I shall say simply that I have resolved to spend the rest of my life on nothing but trying to acquire some knowledge of nature, which is such that one could draw from its rules for medicines that are more reliable than those we have had to present, and that my inclination puts me at such a great distance from all other sorts of plans, and chiefly from those that can be useful to some only by being harmful to others, that if circumstances were to force me to busy myself with them, I do not at all believe I could succeed. About this I am here making a declaration which I know very well cannot serve to make me eminent in the world, but I also have no desire to do so, and I shall always hold myself obliged more to those by whose favor I enjoy my leisure without hindrance than to those who might offer me the most honorable positions on earth. The end. That is the end of part 6 and the end of the discourse on method. Thank you guys. I'll see you later.